There might not have been all that many games released on the launch days of the Game Boy Color, but within a couple of weeks of the North American release, there'd be quite a lot more. Particularly the day of December 1st, 1998, which saw a grand total of 15 titles hit the shelves. Inevitably, with such a rush on, a lot of these were either colorized re-releases or otherwise kinda not very good. We saw an example of the latter last week, and after thoroughly dressing down NFL Blitz developers' digital Eclipse, I find that it turns out they actually released 2 more titles on that dark day of December the 1st. Similar to the football shenanigans of last week, they were both published by Midway Games and were both heavily downgraded ports of arcade titles. Next week's episode is an absolute doozy that I'm still not even sure how to review, short of spitting absolute fiery venom, but we'll throw ourselves off that bridge when we come to it. Rampage World Tour isn't as catastrophically bad as the other one. I can't even bring myself to mention the name just yet, you'll have to wait. But it's still quite a rushed and, as a result, flawed port of the title that almost certainly could have been done better. Now, I don't know if you could call Rampage an arcade classic, but when it was released in 1986, it certainly turned a few heads. Not that long after its launch, the title would find its way onto almost everything contemporary, from the 8-bit consoles of the NES and Master System, ZX Spectrum and Commodore 64, basically every Atari console, and even the Tandy Color computer, you know, the old Radio Shack thing. You control one of 3 indescribably nasty monsters that hold a strong resemblance to, but for legal reasons are not, King Kong, Godzilla, and Wolfman, with the aim of literally rampaging through many cities and causing as much wanton destruction as possible. You'll climb buildings to smash them, punch choppers out of the air, munch down on members of the public, and even stomp through the army through 150 days of destruction and 50 different cities. It's totally mindless carnage. Don't try to find any reason or justification for the anarchy you're committing, as there isn't any, save that the monsters have apparently escaped from a lab where they were being tested on, and now want to seek revenge. World Tour was the 1997 reboot of the series for arcades, N64, PlayStation, and Sega Saturn, with this handheld variant coming out a year later. You'll arrive in some nondescript city with something like 4 or 5 buildings in it that wraps around as you walk from left to right. The aim is to climb each building, smashing every window on both sides. Once you've done that, you'll move on to the next stage. You press up when standing at the base of the wall to climb. You need to be within quite a narrow area else it won't work, or you can jump with A and grab on a little higher up. It's a bit finicky to attach yourself on, but perhaps not as bad as you're imagining. Then, the B button and a direction will let you punch through the windows, within which you might reveal a human or a pickup, both of which can be eaten by pressing B again. Climb upwards and continue smashing, then go over the top and smash the other side. Once you're done, the building will crumble to the ground. It's not as simple as just that, though. At the same time, there'll be humans shooting at you from the ground, lobbing grenades from windows, or firing at you from helicopters, tanks, or even jetpacks. Take these out as best you can, but note that they do just respawn, so keep a mind on smashing and dashing. Hanging around for too long will deplete your health. The HP bar is fairly generous, but will run out if you don't work with some urgency. Eating pedestrians gives you a bit of health back, as does finding foodstuffs behind windows. Not a lot, mind, but it helps. You might also find certain icons that will completely demolish the building should you pick them up. It might seem like a one-note game, but there's actually a fair bit to pay attention to. The game never stops, and neither should you, and even some sort of strategy or optimization you can use if you want to get deeper into it. Not all consumables are useful, some are toxic or otherwise harmful. Depending on which character you're playing, you might want to target eating the humans, or not. It takes a little while for the animation to play, so perhaps only do it when you're playing as George the Ape, as he's quickest. Ralph, the rat-wolf thing, is super slow, so he'll just be vulnerable to other attacks. Target the most threatening humans, obviously, i.e. the ones shooting at you, but otherwise it's probably best to just leave them alone. When climbing buildings, you might get stuck behind a neon sign, which you'll need to take out. Make sure you don't do this when it's lit up, because you'll get electrocuted and fall to the ground. Falling is bad here. It'll make you more vulnerable to bullets and artillery. Low-lying buildings can be jumped on a few times. They work as trampolines for 3 or 4 bounces, after which they'll be destroyed. You might remember from other versions of Rampage that you could do this for any building to quickly wreck them, should you be able to get to the top. This doesn't work here, sadly, which can only be an oversight. No real reason why this option should have been left out, unless it made the game too quick. That's the only thing I can think of. Now, sure, it was never a super deep game or anything, and you'd be dumb to expect otherwise in the Game Boy version. However, here it's probably the shallowest it's ever been. There are tons of levels, each of which is purportedly in a new city, but each one looks exactly the same, with the barest minimum of graphical design. There's nothing but bright blue sky for the backgrounds, even when in British cities like Liverpool or Edinburgh, which, if you've ever been here, you'll know that's not realistic at all. And save for the sheer volume of enemies, there's nothing really new in that regard ever introduced as you go along. Lots of levels doesn't make up for this amount of repetitiveness. The challenge is quite high, but simultaneously also not, as you get infinite continues and the level doesn't even restart if you die, you just carry on. I can't imagine anyone ever saw the end to this game. The presentation is fairly rubbish, incredibly pixelated graphics with uninteresting backgrounds, and while the explosion sounds are quite hefty, they are repetitive as heck. There's no sound at all when the buildings collapse, and the music is terrible. Very little effort in either camp, it's fair to say. The controls are only okay, could have been smoother, and the gameplay itself is only really fun enough to sustain you for a short while. So as for the developers, their second attempt on the color was better than their first, but still left a ton of scope for improvement. Don't think that's it for Digital Eclipse, far from it. Not only would they do the sequel to this the following year, but they also had their hand in like 60-something games on the Game Boy Color. Similar to how my DMG side quest, if you remember, was to find a decent Game Boy fighting game, I'm very curious to discover if Digital Eclipse did any decent Game Boy Color titles at all. Not sure whether quality or quantity was their MO, but it doesn't look great so far.